It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary, to the sweetest girl I know. Goodbye, Staten Island, farewell to Times Square. It's a long, long way to Tipperary, and my heart right there. Into New York City came an Irishman one day to stay with friends from Ireland who had found good work and pay, singing songs of Dublin, Mayo Park and Donegal. Young Paddy got nostalgic and he said to one alone, it's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way.
Good evening, everybody, and you're all very welcome to the launch of Ballinasloe and District Remembers 1914 to 1918. My name is Brian Casey, and it's my privilege to be the MC for this evening. First of all, I want to thank Private Niall Kelly of the 6th Infantry Battalion, Customs Barracks, for opening the event with that piping. So the book Ballinasloe and District Remembers 1914 to 1918 is the culmination of 5 years' work by Ballinasloe World War I Heritage Group, and it is our commemoration to mark the end of the Great War. The group's journey began with the restoration of the Roll of Honour. You can see a display of it there. It now hangs in the library history room downstairs. While researching the 88 names in the Roll of Honour, countless other names are also discovered and documented. The book gives an insight into the lives of those in Ballinasloe and surrounding areas who served in World War I and the lives of their families. In addition to the military records, there are photos and information on families, and also many chapters detailing life at the time. As many of you purchased it, you can see it's quite a hefty tome, but it is also a very good volume and quite easy to read. And it offers a very fascinating insight into the lives of people that may well have been lost to posterity, only for the very hard work of the group involved in compiling it. So as you can see, the book is for sale here tonight, and it will be available from Salmons tomorrow in Salmons and other local outlets. And it will be available to send worldwide if ordered through Kenny's Bookshop in Galway. And details of that we put on the Facebook page, and members of the committee will tell you how to do that as well. So you can see the military exhibition on display here tonight. It'll be here for all week until Saturday the 10th of November, and it'll be open to the public during normal library opening hours, which are 11 to 1 and 2 to 5. So the larger exhibition on display will continue until tomorrow, and there'll be a smaller one on display afterwards. So this evening consists of song, lecture, poetry, music, as well as the launch of the book by Rowan McGreevy of the Irish Times. So first of all, I'd like to call upon Jimmy Stone to sing Calling Down the Line, and then Private Niall Kelly will then play The Flowers of the Forest.
that is what it said. Don't you fret, we'll be home by Christmas Day. And the piper played a lively tune, where the boys away, calling down the line, calling down the line. And the piper played a lively tune, calling down the line. The sergeant major pushed them hard. They were trained in only days, ought to take the front on the Western Front. They'd soon be on their way. And off they marched, rifles shoulder high. And as they marched, they sang, "Oh, we fight this war to win all wars. We've a piper in the band, calling down the line, calling down the line. We'll fight this war to end all wars with our piper in the band." As a thunder rolled along the trench, and the shells of Minion rained, and the general spent 1,000 men for every inch they gained. And those brave young men who did their best and prayed that it might stop, and the pipers stood in the line of fire and played them over the top, calling down the line, calling down the line. And the pipers stood in the line of fire, calling down the line. When the silence fell on no man's land, and they counted all the dead, victories won, disguised in shame, there was no more could be said. And those brave young men who fought and died, we know they did their best. And the piper played a sad lament, calling down the line. Sing with me. Calling down the line, calling down the line. And the piper played a sad lament, calling down the line. Keep the bonfires burning till
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you, Niall, for that. So now I'd like to call upon Michael Glynn, who's going to read the poem he wrote especially for the occasion, which is included in the book. So Michael hails from Kildare and has written many poems and short stories, some of which have been published in Ireland's Zone. And his most recent publication is a book of poetry called The Man in the Cap. So I'll just call upon Michael Glynn.
This poem was written in the form of a letter. It's called A Letter to the Front. I hope this letter finds you safe as it's leaving us okay. Your father sends his best regards and says he prays for you each day. The turf has not been gathered yet, and there's still crops on the land. Things seem so much harder now without your helping hand. Your sister Nora got a job. She'll help us with her pay. And your little brother Michael is starting school today. The hurlers lost last Sunday in the field beyond the hill. They blame it on the muddy ground and the absence of your skill. We listen to the news each day on how the war has spread. The word they use is casualties, but it's really young men dead. The last time that you wrote to me, you were ready in tanks and bombs. And heading for an unknown place, you said they called the Somme. I hope they end this senseless war, or is it too late to try? And send all you brave boys home, so no one else must die. In closing now, I pray you're safe on that hostile shore, and hoping that it won't be long until you're home once more. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So now I'm just going to call upon Brendan Smith, who's going to give us a short lecture as well. So Brendan works with the Insight Centre for Data Analytics at NUI Galway. Presently, he's undertaking research in the non-weaponry elements of World War I. He's looking at the food and drink of frontline troops, how global social media among young people became a phenomenon of the war years. He's also looking at the huge advances in electronic communications during this period, the rise of popular music, the promotion of drugs by warring states, and other interesting subjects, such as government-secret surveillance and censorship, racism and healthcare. So we just give a talk, just want to get the PowerPoint set up now in a minute or two.
I was amazed that a lot of these issues like fake news, global communications, mass surveillance, a lot of these anyway, started in World War I, even our concerns about healthy food. So at the moment, NATO are very concerned about Russia in terms of their ability to take control of communications, particularly the underwater cables that exist joining us to the Americas, to Europe and to Africa. And they're concerned that what could happen is that Russia will cut the wires. But that just didn't happen today. It happened right back in 1914. And here is a map, if you can just make it out, the transatlantic and other cables connecting the world in terms of communications in 1914. Most of those cables were actually owned by the British. It had a huge empire, and the way to keep it together was on communications itself. And it wasn't the Russians in 1914 that cut the wires, it was the British. The first act of World War I of the British was not a military act, it was carried out by a postal office ship, a cable laying off a ship, the Alert, that actually cut all the 5 underwater cables that joined Germany to the rest of the world, and particularly to the Americas. And because of that, they controlled what went out, in many ways, out of Germany, the opposition. Surveillance, big problem at the moment. We're all concerned about the internet and what governments can see our stuff. There's no such thing as a secret on the web anymore. And it's part of the elections, particularly in the Americas, that came up during the Trump campaign. That is nothing new either. On the first day of the war, right across the British Empire, they put in all the main telecommunications offices from Hong Kong to Zanzibar, right through to London. They put in a sensor to control what went in and out, and not just to control it, to actually read it. So what happened was, with the Germans having no transatlantic cable anymore, they had to route all their messages to their embassies, say in the Americas, through Copenhagen. But what happened to the Copenhagen is that they had to connect into London. So the British were tapping in, eavesdropping all the communications that were going out in Germany through cables. So the Germans were forced in many circumstances to actually use the airwaves. Censorship was very much an issue in World War I. All the letters that went from Ireland, say, abroad, all the letters that were sent out by the troops, the letters that would come from part of the British Empire like Australia or the Dominions, again would be opened. There was a huge army of censors reading what came in and out. So again, there was no such thing as privacy. But probably the biggest change in World War I was on military communications. This was a signal corps of the Seaford Highlanders in 1914, and they had the old technologies. What you see here is semaphore, you see the flags, and you see the lanterns. And they used these lanterns, and I have one here in my hand. It's from World War I, and it's in its pouch. It would send out a signal from the officers to, say, to the trenches. Now, obviously, if you're sending out a Morse code on something like this, you could only use it in one direction, otherwise the enemy would pick it up. Now, unlike British intelligence, the British Army were not really prepared for this new type of electrical communications. The British Expeditionary Force in 1914 only had 4 wireless sets, and they would send out the message by Morse code, the dots and the dashes. 3 of them were cavalry units, because they expected the cavalry had horses, it was heavy equipment, and it would only move with the horses and the cart rather than with the infantry units. This is one of the famous Morse codes unit, the Morse key. We have a number of them from that period on display up in the museum in Galway, the Computer and Communications Museum. I have one here from World War I. Because of huge increase in communications, electrical communications, lots of people had to be trained how to use Morse code. So this is one of their training devices, and you can see the Morse, which is code, which represents different letters of the alphabet and so on. They're listed here on my left, and a little signal will come up here, light on my right-hand side. So that was used by the Signal Corps during World War I as a training element. And so British, they copped on fairly quickly what was happening in terms of their actual supremacy in this area, but the Germans were doing the same thing as well, as much as they could. This was a generator powered by 2 guys on bicycles. This is the British using communications from the front line, from the trenches to the division, the battalion and so on, using the Morse code and electrical wiring. This is the Germans. Using something similar for telephones. So telephone really came to fruition in World War I because it was easier to send out an audio message than it was a series of dots and dashes because all the noises of battle. One of the hardest jobs in World War I was the laying of wires. So as troops advanced or not advanced into, with shelling and everything, the wires were constantly being destroyed, broken. So the bravest of the brave troops were those that actually had to go to the front line, put the wires underground. This is telephony office. It looks like something from the 1960s and 70s. This would be back at HQ. Big concern, I do a lot of work in cyberbullying and internet safety, and so many parents and older people are concerned about the amount of social media time that our young people are spending in terms of communicating with each other. That's not a new issue. World War II was when social media between young people mushroomed basically out of nowhere. With so many men fighting on the fronts, they had to stay in contact to give them some type of sanity with their women folk, their moms in particular. They never wrote to their dads, I don't know why, and to their girlfriends and to their wives. And you could see this is just after the end of the war. In March 1919, they were still sending out 11 million letters and 9 million going in the opposite direction from the troops. That is a huge amount of letters. So you weren't writing to your girlfriend once a week or to your wife, you were probably writing 3 or 4 times. And Regent Park in Britain was the centre where all this mail had to go through. And what were they writing about? Of course, romance, love, and so on. Social, seeing how things were at home and what was happening at home, and food. My God, they wrote so much about food. The old parcel was so important. If they didn't get their steaks, or sorry, not their steaks, their actual jam tarts and their breads and so on, very concerned. And I noticed, looking through all the different, and I have dozens upon dozens of letters written by the Austrian troops, the German troops, the Italian troops, the British troops, the American troops, and they're all exactly the same. There was no difference. They had the same concerns, they had the same interests as anybody either side of the army. So here I have a picture of a postcard, and it was obviously a staged one, as you can see, of a French soldier writing to his sweetheart, a German soldier writing to his sweetheart, a British sailor writing to his sweetheart, and vice versa, and an Austrian. There is no difference in the content. They were all exactly the same. Upsurge in photography. There's a huge increase in photography at the moment, thanks to things like Instagram. Now, in World War I, there was also a huge increase, thanks to this development here. Just was developed by the Eastman Kodak company in the decade before World War I, and it was the Brownie camera. Now, it's not brown, of course, in colour it's black. It was called Brownie after Little Fairies, from a very popular series of comic stories for young people. But it was made out of cardboard. It was so simple to use, and like what was there before, you just pointed it in the direction and clicked the button. And it was marketed for young people. It only cost $1. In those days, even $1 was almost next to nothing. Why was it so cheap? Because the company made their monies out of the processing of the films. But the big thing for the troops, and there's a picture of the camera just on the left, was the development of this. This was a pocket camera. It was called a vest camera because you could put it into your vest. A little thing that all the troops used, or a lot of them, only $1. So if you look at all those great pictures we have from World War I, so many of them were taken on little cameras like this, and it opens up very nicely. So Instagram and young people and photography, nothing new. Young people all across the war fronts were using cameras like that. Popular music, obviously, I have an iPhone. I listen to music every day, and we think it's new. Portable music is a new development, particularly since the Walkman, Sony back in the 1970s. No, it wasn't. The gramophone companies made gramophones that were portable and were specifically developed for the troops at the front to listen to what was known as pop music or popular music. Drug addiction in young people, big concerns at the moment about legalization. There's pros and cons of cannabis, the upsurge in heroin, about how drugs are damaging our health. Is that a new phenomena? No, it's not. In World War I, it was smoking. Tobacco was encouraged by all the governments, and every parcels that were sent out, the troops were looking for a cigarette, a fag. Originally, they were using the pipes. The problem using a pipe is that you gave your position away to in the trenches to the opposition. So they disencouraged pipes and encouraged more and more smoking using cigarettes. And nearly every parcel the troops got had to contain cigarettes. And your lover would send you out a cigarette, and giving one and having your photograph taken was kind of considered romantic. And even in the hospitals, there's a very pretty nurse with a young lad, and again, what's she feeding him but a cigarette? And the famous Princess Mary Christmas box went out to all the troops within the British forces, or a lot of them anyway, for Christmas. It was promoted by Princess Mary, son of the King and Queen of England, and it contained an ounce of tobacco, but that was kind of dying a death for the pipe, cigarettes, the lighter, as well as a Christmas card. And I have one of them here, photographed like a pin-up girl of Princess Mary's sweets and chocolates. It was silver casing, and forgive the misspelling, for the officers, but only brass for the non-officers. After a while, they were realizing they were spending too much metal making these things. So this is a guy, he's grown up now, a young lad, he's probably only about 10. He's now smoking like a trooper. He is now one of the men because he has a fag in his mouth. Dangers of processed food. Lots of people like me are concerned what we're giving our young people. Chemically treated food, processed food, staying too long in cans, too much salt, too much sugars. Processed food is not a new phenomenon. It really started en masse in World War I. This is Salonika, pyramids of bully beef and hard biscuits. Hard biscuits big because bread went stale. So the British forces gave their troops hard biscuits. You know, really, they were very hard to eat. This is a problem. They didn't have the best teeth in World War II, and a lot of them broke their teeth. Big problem with dental hygiene in World War II. This is probably one of the most famous of all the foods that they took. It's canned corned beef. Corned beef really started in Ireland. Up until the middle of the 19th century, corned beef, which is beef with a corn of salt, kept longer because of the actual salt. Ireland was the capital of the corned beef trade, and the biggest factories for it was down in County Cork. But once it was started to go into cans, the British globalized their food. So a lot of the meat, and they got more meat in the war, the troops, the military forces, than they ever did at home. At home, when I grew up, we only had meat on the roast beef was on a Sunday. But likewise in World War I, but they were getting meat nearly every single day, if not every day. The meat came from places like Uruguay, Argentina. Now obviously, I'm talking mainly about Europeans. There were special ethnic foods for, say, halal meats and so on for troops from Muslim countries and from India. The rations that the troops would have got was canned beef, canned stew, and it was known as the Irish stew. It contained meat and vegetables, canned jams, the biscuits, the teas and the coffees, variations of that. And that was one of the most famous companies based in Aberdeen processing it. But Oxo was really popular with the troops. That little concentrated piece of beef, mix it with hot water and it tasted divine. They were always asking for that. But unfortunately for a lot of troops, the food became so boring after a while. The troops used to call plum and apple jams like this, contained in tin cans. They knew it as frog spawn. They were screaming for strawberry, blackcurrant, raspberry, but they kept getting plum and apple. And if you ever look at it, it does look like frog spawn. The stew, again, the monotony of it all was too much for a lot of the actual troops. This was an interesting development in World War I, was condensed powdered rations. So I have here in my hand a full packet of foods for the troops. It contains coffee, tea, cocoa, milk, powdered milk and lemonade. So processed and condensed food really took off hugely. And remember, World War I was so different than the other wars. Why? Because it was 24/7. Why? Because of electricity. It was 12 months. They didn't have to rely on the seasons. Other wars in previous centuries, everything kind of slowed down in the winter and in the early spring because there was no food growing. Now we had mass globalization of food markets. Cooking and eating. The picture on my left was taken in the early days of the war when they were having fires of the food, but that was starting to attract enemy fire, just like smoke in the pipe. So what happened was there was a beautiful little invention done called the Tommy cooker, and it was a little piece of metal with 3 legs, and sitting on top of it would be your pots, this is a fantastic invention, the mess kit. It's a very multi-purpose. You could not only eat your food from it, but cook your food from it. But what they gave with it was smokeless fuel, because you didn't want to attract enemy forces. So that's the tin can in action. Now the officers, total different class altogether. The officers in the British Army in World War II, they all came from families of the aristocracy or the upper middle class. They all had servants. And whether they were at the front or whether they were at base, they all were well looked after. The ordinary squaddies, the ordinary Tommies, they got fairly low-level foods like maybe cakes and stuff like that from home. The officers would get port wine, brandy, as well as good quality foods, pheasant and so on. Food parcels, as I say, big. Now, so recycling isn't a new phenomenon. There was a lot of these cans lying around. There was a big shortage of, after a while, of metal. So they start to replace the metal cans with cardboard, and we have them today in Cadbury's milk chocolate or Bourneville and so on. So that's when they first came in, and the cans that they had were used to improvise as grenades. Racism is a big issue at the moment, and I was amazed looking at the comics that I have from World War I. There was a caricature of people from Africa, they're called Nigs here. There was a caricature even with the Irish fighting in the British Army. there was a lot of caricaturization of the Irish as stupid. Even for me, if you listen to the words of A Long Way to Tipperary, there's a little bit of stupid Irish coming through there. And this is from a children's magazine about the stupid Irish lad gets too drunk and the pig, he's bringing the pig to market, and the pig has to bring him back because he gets drunk, which is kind of, in some ways you could look at it as funny, and it could be Scottish or Welsh. But if you look at the features of the farmer, he has those ape-like features that you got in Punch magazine, a lot of the Victorian magazines from the 19th century. So racism, even though the Indians and the black Africans and the Irish were fighting in the British Army, they weren't looked on in many cases as equals. The first senior officer that was a Catholic only came in, got the position at about 6 years before World War I. Catholics were still looked on as second-class citizens in many cases, and the British Empire almost had a Darwinian philosophy, like empires all across the world, in terms of the upper class, the upper race, and everybody else, the colonial peoples. So I have loads of stuff from World War I, and the great thing is when I look at the matches, when I look at the cigarettes, when I look at the drinks, when I look at the photographs, no matter what side people were on, they were all the same. And I think it's so good. We've progressed so much in 100 years. We are now a united Europe, well, generally speaking anyway. And, you know, the Germans, the French, the Italians, a lot of us now are just, there's no difference. I work in an institute at the university. We have 33 different countries working together, and I think that's so beautiful in so many ways. I will have a bigger demonstration of these with the enamel cups, with the pipes, with the cigarettes. I'm working with Craig's School. We're getting modern cans, and we're covering with the old signage from World War I. We have the old comics, so you can read them, look at them, touch them, use them. In Loughrea with Joe, and yes, we have that next Friday, isn't it? Friday of next week. 15th, yeah. And finally, during the Science Festival on the 25th of November, I'm having an exhibition as part of the Science Festival with a number of schools, in particular Craig's, and this exhibition will be all on display during the month of January at the university. Thank you for your time. Thanks.
Thanks, Brendan. That was great. It was really very enjoyable. So now I'm calling upon local historian Eamon O'Donoghue to recite the poem Exposure by Wilfred Owen.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the introduction, Brian. I think historian might be putting it a little bit too strong, but anyway, here I am. Glad to be associated with this event, and my thanks to the Heritage Committee for the opportunity to be part of it. I would also like to compliment them on creating what in future will be a very, very important archive for all of us. The poem I'm about to read by Wilfred Owen is called Exposure. Wilfred Owen was an English soldier who fought throughout World War I, was invalided out after the first year and a half, and after a period of convalescence, against the wishes of all his friends, he rejoined the war and was killed just 1 week, almost to the hour, before the end of the war in 1918. I hope you'll like the poem or enjoy it. It's a very practical expression of what actually it was like for the men who stood in the trenches and marched over the barbed wire or through it in no man's land. His poetry, and this poem in particular, wasn't very popular during the wartime because it didn't send out the right message in terms of recruiting more soldiers for the front. So I dedicate this poem to all the names on the chart here in front of me and behind me. Exposure. Our brains ache in the merciless iced east winds that knife us. Wearied, we keep awake because the night is silent. Low, drooping flares confuse our memory of the salient. Worried by the silence, sentries whisper, curious, nervous, but nothing happens. Watching, we hear the mad gusts tugging on the wire, like twitching agonies of men among its brambles. Northward, incessantly, the flickering gunnery rumbles far off, like a dull rumour of some other war. What are we doing here? The poignant misery of dawn begins to grow. We only know that war lasts, rain soaks, and clouds sag stormy. Dawn massing in the east, her melancholy army attacks once more in ranks on shivering ranks of grey. But nothing happens. Sudden successive flights of bullets streak the silence, less deadly than the air that shudders black with snow, with sidelong flowing flakes that flock, pause, and renew. We watch them wandering up and down the wind's nonchalance, but nothing happens. Pale flakes with fingering stealth come feeling for our faces. We cringe in holes, back on forgotten dreams, and stare, snow-dazed, deep into grassier ditches. So we drowse, sun-soaked, littered with blossoms, trickling where the blackbird fusses. Is it that we are dying? Slowly, our ghosts drag home, glimpsing the sunk fires, glazed with the crusted dark red jewels. Crickets jingle there. For hours, the innocent mice rejoice. The house is theirs. Shutters and doors all closed. On us, the doors are closed. We turn back to our dying. Thank you.
Thank you, Eamon. Now, I just want to call upon Marie Mannion. She's here still. Yes, Marie Mannion is, many of you know, the wonderful Heritage Officer of Galway County Council, and she's going to say a few words as well.
Thank you very much, Brian. Members of Ballinasloe World War I Committee, elected members, Reverend Fathers, sisters and distinguished guests, it's such a wonderful pleasure to be here in Ballinasloe this evening on this momentous occasion of the launch of this incredible achievement of a small band of people here in Ballinasloe. The 615 pages that have been presented to us represent hours upon hours of sheer hard work, dedication and research. And what the group have left us with is a legacy for all of us, a legacy for us here to understand more about those that went before, those who gave their lives for World War I, all the family members that supported them in so many different ways, the families that were left behind, the descendants and those that went before. The work of compiling all this information is phenomenal, and the group are to be commended for spending hours. Even if you just look at the graveyard in Cree alone, the sheer vastness of that graveyard, and the group went out and photographed all the graves relating to those associated with World War I, and that was only one aspect. They left no stone unturned. They went to every archive, any new resource that became available online, they made sure that they included it. the big thing as well is that they have the personal stories and the links. They have the stories of those who are left behind. They also collected the memorabilia. And when it's amazing to think that all this started with that roll of honour that you see in front of you, with 88 names. And the first time that Dougie Rafter brought me up to St. Gwellan's Hall to see, the hall was about to be, I suppose, dismantled and taken down, and the determination that Dougie and the group had to save it, because they knew what it represented. You know, it represented something huge in the whole history of Ballinasloe, and not just Ballinasloe, but the county of Galway and the west of Ireland. And since 2014, when the group came together, they have dedicated their lives to telling the story of those 88 people, plus the countless others that you're going to read about in the book. And as Heritage Officer of the county, I suppose, I am so proud of the group for their achievement, because I have seen the work they've put in. They have been forensic in their research, and they want to make sure that they got everything right. And I think for that, it's just absolutely incredible. They have created such a resource for everybody, and it was wonderful that they had all the school children in here today, because getting them interested and getting them to know about World War I and the people from this area that gave their lives to that war is extremely important. And, you know, another aspect of the publication is, you know, a lot of people would look and they might see medals or they might see memorabilia associated with the war, but they don't understand what they're looking at. And a wonderful aspect of the book is they've explained all the crosses, they've explained the medals, they've explained the, the death penny. A lot of people would look at them and say, oh, they're nice, but mightn't understand them. So that's going to be a huge benefit, not just for the community of Ballinasloe, but for the county and the country at large. Also the fact that they've created a bibliography and a listing of sources that they used is going to be huge for other people in undertaking their research. So for all of this, normally I don't do notes, I just, whatever I say, but for this I want to pay tribute, and I took the book with me, I borrowed it off Coleman, just the founding members that had the foresight back, and it was more than 2014, because I've known this bunch of wonderful people quite a long time before that, but people that have the foresight and give their lives to making sure that we've this incredible publication that is so wonderful for the county to have. I'm going to call out all their names. So the founding committee, the chairperson was Stephen Connell, and God rest, he was an absolutely wonderful person. Secretary Dougie Rafter, Treasurer Jerry Devlin, who doubles up, and you see the wonderful cover on the publication. Jerry designed that, and I think that cover tells you everything. You have the soldiers in the front, and you have the roll of honour that were the reason for this publication in the first place. Brian Casey, archivist, Evelyn Donlan, PRO, Declan Kelly, then committee member, Brendan Donlan, Oliver Donlan, Frank Kelly, Paddy Riddle, RIP, and Francis Byrne. And the committee that we have here today, Dougie as chairperson, Margaret Moran as secretary, Jerry Devlin as treasurer, Evelyn as PRO, and of course their finance committee, which is Dougie, Jerry and Frank, and the committee members Brian Casey, Aidan Darcy, Brendan Donlan, Oliver Donlan, Declan Kelly, Paula Kennedy, Pádraig Moran and Ivan O'Grady. Ladies and gentlemen, some of these people are out the door, they haven't even seats. Would you please put your hands together for wonderful people? And I never miss an opportunity to promote another event, but on Thursday the 15th of November in the Loughrea Hotel and Spa. Loughrea Memorial Group, namely Coleman Shaughnessy and Joe Lucknan, are going to have a wonderful conference on 1980 in Ireland, and Brendan Smith is going to be there showcasing all his wonderful memorabilia. But it's going to be a wonderful day, and that group are actively working in Loughrea to give people a greater understanding of World War I in that area. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's just a wonderful privilege to be here tonight, because I have seen firsthand the work that the group have done. The last time I saw the publication, it was 648 pages on a computer screen, and today it's 615 pages in a magnificent publication. It truly is by, with and for the people of World War I and Ballinasloe, and is a wonderful legacy for us in the county. Goré mil maithagah.
Thank you, Marie. Now it's my privilege to call upon Ronan McCreevy to launch the book this evening. So Ronan is a news reporter of the Irish Times. He's the author of the book, Wherever the Firing Line Extends, Ireland in the Western Front. He is also the editor of Centenary, Ireland Remembers 1916, the official state book recalling the commemorations of 2016. He is the presenter of the full-length documentary, United Ireland, How Nationalists and Unionists Fought Together in Flanders, produced by the Irish Times. Previously, he wrote for the Times, the London Evening Standard and the Irish Post. And next week, he'll be made a Chevalier by the French government for his work on the First World War. I'd like to call upon Ronan McCreevy to launch the book.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start off by thanking the Ballinasloe First World War Heritage Group for the honour of asking me to launch this book, particularly to Evelyn Donlan and to Ivan O'Grady. Ivan's wife Janice and I go back a long, long way, as the song goes. I have to say that I've never been to a talk before where I'm able to say to one of the people that's there, I used to push you in the pram when you were a baby. Janice, I hope doesn't mind me saying that, but when Janice and Gillian, her twin sister, and my brother are almost exact contemporaries, and my mother used to kick me out of the house to walk all of them down the back lane when I was a kid. So it's great to be here, and I mean, what Marie said is basically what I wanted to say as well, really, and she said an awful lot of it for me. This is a result of 4 years of hard work, and you know, speaking as a historian myself, what really struck me about it was the meticulous level of detail in it, the attention to detail, the accuracy of it, and the comprehensive nature of it. And you know, I'm so used to, I speak at a lot of events over the last 4 years, and I'm used to speaking to, you know, 20 people in a room, and they're usually obsessives like myself. And I've been going around the country thinking, like, how do you break out of that indifference that there is to the First World War? Because the First World War is the biggest conflict that Irish people were ever involved in, and yet most people will walk the other side of the street and they don't know anything, and what they know is just cliches. And you know, you've done it. I mean, I've never spoken at a crowd this size, and it's a crowd that's it's multi-generational, and in particular, you know, I find that one of the things I've been trying to do, particularly with the film that I produce, is to make the First World War interesting to a younger generation, because it's eternally interesting, and we'll still be talking about the First World War in 200 years and in 1,000 years' time. And this book and books like it are far more important than what any government will do, or what a historian will do, or authors like myself, because it's not done. This book isn't done to fit a political agenda. It's not trying to push a version of our history on other people, because God knows we have enough of that already. This book is authentic because it's from the heart and it's from local people, and that's what matters. History is only important when people actually engage with it on a local basis. And you know, I heard when you started the book that the first thing you did was to go to the local schools, and I think that's fantastic. You know, I would hope that as a result of this legacy, the centenary here, that young people will become more engaged with this part of our history. And, you know, I found myself that over the age of, say, 65, there's no problem in interesting people in the First World War, because they knew veterans growing up. Everybody did. You know, I knew them in my own hometown of Carrick-on-Shannon as well. And but after that, the memory's gone. And if we don't, it's books like this that bring it back into vogue for people. And there's a French saying that to be forgotten is to die twice. And the men from Ballinasloe are being remembered twice. First, when this memorial was erected, I presume sometime in the 1920s, and now when it's been restored to its old glories. And I think what's really exceptional about the book that's been produced is not that Ballinasloe was anyway exceptional as an Irish town in the First World War. It was absolutely typical. It's just like my own town of Carrick-on-Shannon. And it wasn't a garrison town. It had the same mixture of old ascendancy families, Protestant families, and Catholic families as every other small town in Ireland had. And I was looking at the 1911 census. The population of Ballinasloe in 1911 was, and the environs, is approximately 5,000. And when you think about it, right, 88 men locally from the town died. Now, Damien McConnell, who's sometimes colleague of mine in the Irish Times, estimates 700 people locally fought in the war, men fought in the war. I did the maths on it because there's quite a good rule of thumb that for every man who died, there was 7. So the ratio of fatalities was 1 in 7. So I multiplied 88 by 7 and I got the number 616, which is just one more than the pages that are in the book. So there's a page in the book for almost every man locally who served in the First World War. And one of the things that's really extraordinary about Ballinasloe is that the level of recruitment in Ireland was the lowest in the United Kingdom as it was then. And it was lower still in the west of Ireland, because you had this narrative that men from the west of Ireland didn't sign up because basically they were wanted on the farm, etc. And yet, when you look at the level of participation in this war by local people, it's quite extraordinary. I mean, this is the equivalent of, losing, the minor, junior, intermediate and senior hurling teams from this town in 4 years. That's the best way to look at it. That's the best way to describe it. And it's the same age cohort as well. And we grew up with this narrative that the men who fought in this war were all forgotten about afterwards. They weren't forgotten about. How could they be? There was just far too many of them. And I think it's really interesting in the book that the Royal British Legion had a hut here, and it survived until 1968. And that says to me an awful lot more about the true attitudes of Irish people towards First World War veterans than what you read in the books or what you read about the cliches about them all being shunned, etc., etc. They weren't. There was just too many of them. And you also have here in Ballinasloe, you have a permanent reminder. You have the homes built for heroes, the ones built under the Irish Soldiers and Land Trust Act of 1919 of 17 houses. Just as I had growing up in Carrick-on-Shannon, just up the road from me, there was 8 houses built for men who served in Salonika in the First World War, a campaign that's almost completely forgotten about. And yet, you go to any town in the west of Ireland, and somebody will have fought in Salonika because the Connacht Rangers was there. And every man in this book has a story to tell, and I could be here all night, but there's a few I'd like to talk about, a few that caught my eye. The Byrne brothers, Privates Michael Byrne, Thomas Byrne, killed 2 years apart. Michael at the First Battle of Ypres in October 1914, and he was part of the 2nd Connacht Rangers, and Thomas during the Battle of the Somme. And what's interesting about them is that Michael's a name on the New Menin Gate. Right? Michael's body was never recovered from the battlefield. Half the men who died in the First World War have no known grave. And Michael is on the New Menin Gate with 55,000 other names in Flanders. And every night they hold the last post and chorus there. And if you ever go to Flanders or go to Ypres, go and say it. It's very moving. But what's interesting about it is that Thomas died during the Battle of the Somme, and his name is on the memorial to the Tietval Memorial to the Missing. The Tietval Memorial to the Missing has 72,500 names. of men who were killed in that battle and whose bodies were never found. Just think about that for a second. Think of that family, the Burns. 2 brothers, no known grave, nowhere to mourn for their mother and father. And that was repeated in every town and village in this country, and also obviously in Britain and France and Germany, etc., etc. And I'm looking here then, of course, at Evelyn Donlan's family. And again, 2 brothers killed in the war. One, Patrick, killed during the Battle of Ypres in October 1914, and the other, John Arthur, killed at the Battle of the Somme, aged 19, and both of them are aged 19. And then you have their first cousin killed in Gallipoli. And then Thomas comes home, dies after the war, presumably from wounds received in it, because he wouldn't have a good war grave otherwise. And it's interesting that the youngest person in this book is 15 and the oldest is 76. And if he got a war grave, he could potentially be the oldest Irish fatality of the war, although there is a general whose name escapes me from Waterford who went to the front when he was 82 and got a chill and died. And I have to say that, some of the stories in the book are just all too familiar to me. Lieutenant James Hay, an only child killed at the Battle of the Somme. You can imagine the grief in that family by losing their only sons. And I'm not just saying this because he invited me and we've been discussing it, but the story of Michael Hillary, Ivan O'Grady's grandfather, is one of the most extraordinary I've come across in my research on the Irish experience of the war. Michael Hillary was a pre-war soldier, so he was in the 2nd Connacht Rangers. There was 2 battalions, regular battalions of the Connacht Rangers, the 1st and the 2nd. So he would have been what was known as one of the old contemptibles, the guys who went to war in 1914. And there's a book by a guy called John Lucy, and it's called The Devil is in the Drum. And he estimates that by the end of 1915, 95% of the men who went over to France in 1914, in August 1914, were killed or wounded. Michael Hillary survived the retreat from Mons in 1914. He survived Salonika, which I referenced before. He survived Gallipoli, which was an absolute hell on earth. Then he went to Mesopotamia, and he survived that again. And he went to Egypt, and he got malaria in a hospital ship in Cairo. And I used to say in my documentary, which is on YouTube if you get a chance to talk about it, to see it, I often refer to the poet Francis Ledwidge as the most travelled Irishman in the First World War, because he went to Gallipoli, he went to Salonika, he went to Egypt, he went to France, and he went to Belgium. But I've never seen a more travelled soldier than Michael Hillary. And then for Michael Hillary to die, to have survived all of that, and then to die on the 10th of October of wounds, just a month before the war ended, it's just quite incredible. And then his brother as well, who died. And Ivan, you told me that you didn't even know he had a brother in the war, another brother who died in the war, who died in Mesopotamia, or in modern-day Iraq. And this is another thing that I noticed in the book, is the number of men who died in Iraq. And you might think, well, the First World War is 100 years ago. It's got nothing to do with what's going on nowadays. It's got everything to do with what's going on nowadays. What's happening in Iraq and Syria is a direct result of the First World War and the different mandates that the French and the British were given out of that. And there's another name. He's not only Roll of Honour, but he's a name that really struck me as being interesting because he's from Mahaskra. There's a guy called Matthew Wilson who features in my book, a chapter on the Iran 12. This is an extraordinary story about 11 soldiers, British soldiers, executed by the Germans in February 1915 in a place called Guise in northern France. One of them was Matthew Wilson, who was from Mahaskra. And it's an extraordinary story. 6 of the men who were killed or executed by the Germans were actually Irish. And you never hear a word about it. You know, we hear obviously about the executions of the leaders of the 1916 Rising and the execution of the 77 anti-treaty rebels, etc. But we don't hear a huge amount about these men who died. And I'm really pleased that story's in the book, because it's one of the most extraordinary and unique events in the whole of the First World War. I'd like to conclude by also thanking Evelyn for mentioning all the women locally who were involved in the First World War. Women, it was a man's war. We started it. We start most wars, let's face it. And we most of the, obviously the vast majority of men, people who died in the First World War were men. But one of them who died was a woman called Violet Barrett. And she died on the RMS Leinster on the 10th of October, the same day that Michael Hillary died. And she is one of 46 women, Irish women, who are listed as combatants who hadn't died in the war. In other words, they are listed, they have a war grave. That's how you list a combatants. So it's really, I'm bowled over this book. It's such an honour to have been asked to launch it. And you know, I want to just say in conclusion, when you go to the New Men Gate, if you ever get the chance, they read that famous poem, which is in the book, called by Robert Bunyan. They shall not grow old as we who are left grow old. The age shall not weary them, or nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. And what you have done is here, you have remembered them, and I commend you for this. It's a tremendous book. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that, Ronan. Just a few quick announcements now as well. So next week, the Athlone Military History Group will be hosting a commemorative day themselves on Sunday the 11th in the Shamrock Lodge Hotel between 11 a.m. and 4 p.m. The Loughrea Historical Group will also be holding, as we've heard already, hosting a day in the Loughrea Hotel on the 15th of November. So just a few thanks that the group want to express as well, because a lot of people helped the group to get this book together as well. And first of all, thank you all. I think we're all blown away by the huge crowd that's here as well. And again, thank you all very much for coming as well. Thanks to the library manager, Una Kelly, and her staff, Breach, Anne and Mark, for the support and encouragement in facilitating, firstly, the housing of the Roll of Honour, and also for hosting this book launch in this. The library here in Ballinasloe is something to be proud of. It is a wonderful venue. We'd also like to thank the former library manager, Kieran Shaughnessy, for his help and support along the way. Tomas and Caroline Golan and their family and staff facilitated our event in 2015 and have been very accommodating to us for all our meetings and helping out in so many ways, far too many to mention. Damien McAnulla was the editor for the book. He did a huge amount of work, and as Evelyn said to me in the notes here, modern technology helped because many of you know Damien lives in Greece. So he was a great help, and he is a man that really loves genealogy as well, and he had a large amount of family information for those that are listed in the book. Mark and Diana and all at KPW were very courteous, professional and dedicated in ensuring that the book is printed. Thanks to the sponsors, especially Ballinasloe Credit Union, without whom the publishing of the book would not have been possible, and the former Ballinasloe Town Council who funded the restoration of the Roll of Honour. Marie Manning and the staff of Galway County Council and Heritage Department were very generous and greatly available throughout the entire project from restoration to publishing. Marie Manning definitely is the gold standard of heritage officers in the country as well. The many people who helped set up the exhibition, again, they're too numerous to mention, thank them all. And thanks to Theo Hanley, the photographer, videographer Paul Kelly, and sound engineer Paul O'Brien. And also to the performers for taking part today, and also you for being present this evening. And also a special thanks to Ronan McCreevy for coming down to launch the book and for speaking so positively about it. We really do appreciate it, and for acknowledging all the hard work into it as well. So another appreciation for Ronan, please. It would be remiss of me not to mention the deceased members of the committee as well, Paddy Riddle, Tony Flaherty, and our former chair, Stevie Connell, who are also very enthusiastic with this as well. And in many ways, this is part of their legacy, for their enthusiasm for this as well. And also, I live in Dublin most of the time, so I missed a lot of the meetings, well, most of the meetings. The work that the committee put in was absolutely tremendous. The energy, the enthusiasm, the effort, and you can see with the size of the book as well. It is something that will be a reference, not just for people in the town, but for other groups looking to do something as well. You're all welcome to stay for refreshments served in the lobby, but before we go our separate ways, I'm just going to ask Sean Glennon to sing Christmas 1915 in No Man's Land. So, Sean.
"1915 on Christmas Day, on the Western Front the guns all died away, and lying in the mud on bags of sand, we heard a German sing from no man's land. He had a tenor voice so pure and true, the words were strange, and everyone we knew, soaring o'er the living, dead and damned, the Germans sang of peace from no man's land. O silent night, no cannons roar, a king is born of peace forevermore. All's calm, all's bright, all brothers hand in hand. In 1915, in no man's land, they left their trenches and we left ours. Beneath the tin hats, their smiles bloomed like wildflowers. With photos, cigarettes, and tots of wine, we built a soldier's truce on the front line. Their singer was a lad of 21. We begged another song before the dawn, and sitting in the mud in blood and fear, he sang again the song all long to hear. O silent night, no cannons roar, a king is born of peace forevermore. All's calm, all's bright, all brothers hand in hand, made gas and rusty wire in no man's land. And in the morning all the guns boomed in the rain, and we killed them and they killed us again, with bayonet, bomb, bullet, gas and flame, and neither we nor they at all to blame. There was heavy fighting right throughout the day. For one night's peace we bloodily did pay. At night they charged, we fought them hand to hand, and yes, I killed the boy who sang from no man's land. O silent night, no cannons roar, a king is born of peace forevermore. All's calm, all's bright, all the soldiers sings, and the sound of peace still rings, while the captains and all the kings build no man's land. Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht, alles schläft, einzeln wacht, nur das Trodehack heiliger Bar, all der Nabe im lagenden Haar,
Crisscross used to carry another 100 if they needed be. When they went into battle, they carried axes, shovels, picks, grenade boxes, ammo boxes, food, water, carried all on their back. The Germans carried their weapon. Right? So the Germans carried leather gear, but they didn't like it because they had to polish it every day. The British started wearing a leather, but what happened was the leather started to rot if you didn't mind it, so it used to break and things like that. So that's far better. Carried more ammunition. She has her ammunition here. She carried about 60 rounds. She carried a water bottle, and she carried a thing in the back called a bread bag. That's used to put in pieces of bread, that a butter dish, their shaving gear, odds and ends, a sewing kit, everything like that. So that's what he carried. He was ready to go, ready for war. He was defending and the British were always attacking. Next thing they had was the steel helmet. That's a model 1916 German helmet. If she was lying, she'd be lying on the ground, and see the way the peak, you see the way the peak is so deep, as you used to get your head in and you used to bury it into the ground, just to give you more protection. You understand what I'm saying to you? It protected the back of the neck, it protected the ears, and it used to protect the top of your head. Because remember these dead balls I showed you? Before that, all you had was a woolly hat to protect you from these dead balls. So this is a far better, wasn't it? The next thing she had would be had the hand grenade. You all seen this in the movies. You all play Xbox. Yeah, you all play Call of Duty and these that. They're all over 18, you're not allowed. So a German soldier would carry 2 of these on his belt. Is that too heavy for you, Mary? So she used to carry 2 of these on her belt. See the white little toggle? You used to push that out, and there's a bit of string all the way up to the explosive part, and you pull it, and you would fire it. And if you were able to time it, it could explode in the mid-air. You could throw it out in front, and the soldiers would walk on top of it. But if you fired it too early, what would happen? No, the British soldiers used to fire it back. So you had to make sure that they didn't get it in time to pick it up and throw it back. And you see Saving Private Ryan. It's a war movie from World War II. You see them throwing in these grenades and the Americans are there trying to load them and fire the grenades back. So that's why you had to be careful with these grenades. Next thing she would have is her butcher bayonet. A butcher bayonet which used to hang, say, here. See? Used to hang down like that. The bayonet went on the top of the rifle. By the way, none of the guns work. Alright, they're all deactivated. If you can imagine, look at. Yeah, you can still shoot, look at. Alright. Only a small percentage of soldiers were killed by the bayonet. Less than 1%. Alright? So that's what the bayonet was for. It's for your last ditch. Your boys are coming over the hill at you. You're down to your last few rounds. You want to protect yourself. And they were all trained on bayonet fighting. So that's Mary's bayonet. So she would carry her bayonet. So her bayonet, you're getting tired yet, Mary? So, next thing she would have would be her shovel. Well, 60 men at night were obliged to dig 60 feet of new trench in one night. 60 men, 60 feet.
How deep?
12 feet. 8 to 12 feet, it all depends on the condition of the ground. So she would carry this, look at here, on this side, sorry, turn around a minute, she would carry it like that. But when you went into the trenches, you never carried it on your carrier. You carried it here, like that. Why did she carry it like that?
She was digging.
No. If somebody was coming in at you, you're close to close. You're in the trench system. You can't swing your rifle around. You would back them in the head. If you look here, it's actually sharpened. See that? I would turn around and go. Well, it would be British. That would go all the way down to the belly button. And then after you just